Story time on how I caught both of my best friends cheating on me with my boyfriend. Yes, both of them. So at the time, I was entering college, and one of my best friends went to the same school as me. My other best friend went to the same school as my boyfriend. And our schools were close. We were only like 10 minutes away from each other. Homecoming is when things started to get fishy. I asked my boyfriend if he wanted to come out to our homecoming games, and he said that he was busy. Then, of course, I asked my best friend, but she said she had cheerleading practices because she was trying to become a cheerleader. I don't know, they just always seem busy doing something around the same time. So then the holiday comes up and I visit my boyfriend's family for Christmas. I don't know, something in me just told me to look at his phone. And he was talking to my best friend, the one he went to school with. And the conversation was just too flirty. So I talked to my other best friend about it that I went to the same school with. And she was like, oh, I always knew something was weird about them too. I, of course, confronted my boyfriend about it, and he said nothing was going on. So I decided to play reverse psychology on my best friend. Come back for part 2. Part 2 on how I caught my boyfriend cheating on me with 2 of my best friends. Like I said, I confronted my boyfriend about it, and he pretended there was nothing going wrong. So I went to my best friend about it, and I kind of did like a reverse psychology thing on her. I told her that my boyfriend told me everything that was going on. And I was like, did y'all even use protection? Not really knowing what's really going on. And she was like, I'm sorry, it was only a one-time thing. And that she was just drunk one night. And I was like, sis, you practically told on yourself because I was joking. And then she kind of like snitched on my other best friend. She was like, I wasn't the only one, you know. And of course, I was like, what you mean? And she said a couple months back when we were in high school that my other best friend had slept with him also. The whole situation was just messy. I ended up cutting off my whole circle. And later on that freshman year, my ex-boyfriend started dating my ex-best friend. This is why you should never catch rides with strangers. So last year in June, one of my closest friends had a graduation party. She lived in New York, so I had to get a cab service to drive me to the party. By the way, I'm from Jersey. I think I paid like $150, but she had told me not to worry about the drive back and that she would drive me back. And plus, she was going to stay over because she really wanted to see my family. Fast forward, I get to the party. I had a great time. I met some of her newer college friends. And everyone seemed pretty cool. We took shots and had hookah. It was real fun. So after the party is over, I get myself ready. And I went to my friend, expecting a ride back. But she was too drunk. One of her friends was like, spend the night. And, go back home tomorrow morning. But I told her I had work and school. The only person that was willing to take me back was one of her friend's cousin. And we're going to call him John. John said he had no problem taking me back. And 2 hours was nothing. All her friends said it'd be safer that way, so I was like, okay. But it turned out to be a big mistake. Come back for part 2. Part 2 of you should never take a ride from a stranger. So, like I said, John volunteered to take me home. Everyone said it was probably best because my best friend was drunk. So I gave John my address. We get in the car and we start heading home. 30 minutes into driving, he starts falling asleep on the road. We literally almost got into an accident. He said he needed to stop and nap for a few minutes. And y'all, if I knew how to drive, I probably would have drove. But he was the only liable driver with a license. And I was kind of nervous about him falling asleep on the road, so I was kind of okay with him stopping. He fell asleep immediately. Me, on the other hand, I stayed up till my phone died, and I knocked out. A couple minutes after sleeping, it sounded like the back door had closed, and it woke me up. I woke John up saying, we need to go. And he's like, what's going on? I told him the car back door literally slammed. He looked back and said, how? The door is locked. And I'm like, no, seriously, I heard the door slam. He was saying maybe you dreamed about it because there's no possible way this door opened. But I'm not dumb. I know what I heard. Come back for part 3. Story time on how I catfished my boyfriend to see if he would cheat on me. So around the time I had to be 15, 16, and my boyfriend, he was probably 17 because he was about 2 years older than me. Everything in our relationship seemed fine, but he was very secretive. For one, he'd never let me touch his phone. He would always make sure anytime he put his phone down, the screen was face downward, or he'd put it in his pocket or just hide it. Anytime I asked to use his phone, maybe to call someone, he'd be like, no. I knew that there was something going on that he wasn't telling me. So I created a fake Snapchat account. I found pictures of this really pretty girl on Instagram, and I used all her pictures. And I'd post stories here and there, and then I decided to reach out to him. And he literally responded in 5 minutes. I said, hey, do you have a girlfriend? And you're not going to believe his response. Come back for part two on how I catfished my boyfriend to see if he would cheat on me. So, like I said, I reached out to him and he responded immediately. I asked him, hey, do you got a girlfriend? And he responded right now that he's just talking to people, but he didn't clarify inside of any of the messages that he had a girl. Then I started thinking maybe he thinks that our relationship is like still in talking stage, so I didn't get too mad until I asked him if he wanted to go out, like go out on a date. He asked me where I would like the date, and I told him I like to meet him at a movie theater. And like for a good week, we're sitting there flirting and we're planning out our date. Now, the whole time of us planning out the date, when the date came, I didn't really expect to see him. But when I walked up to the corner of the movie theater, he was standing outside. Come back for part three. Part three on how I catfished my boyfriend to see if he would cheat on me. So I peek beside the movie theater and I see him standing outside. I was seriously heartbroken that he was going to meet up with the catfish. And I had him sitting there waiting. I was texting him through Snapchat telling him, oh, I'm a bit late. And I literally had him sitting there for 2 hours. Also, during this whole process of him waiting, also went ahead and got food and came back. After a couple minutes, he was like he was just going to leave. By then, I had popped up at the movie theater and asked him, what are you doing here? And he responded, oh, I just got done seeing a movie. I was like, why didn't you tell me you went to the movie theaters? Maybe I could have came with you. Then he was like, no, I just wanted to go by myself. Then I pulled up my phone, showed him a picture of the girl I was catfishing, and asked him, was this your date? Then he pretended to not know who that was, and then I showed him our messages. When he found out it was me the whole time, he got mad at me and broke. Story time on how my best friend faked her death. By the way, we're going to call her Amanda, and we were both 16 at the time. Going through high school, Amanda got bullied a lot. She didn't necessarily know how to defend herself, so I would always find myself defending her all the time. And I had no problem doing it because that was my closest friend. We were like sisters and we grew up together. And people bullied her about her nose being too big and her acne, just really mean stuff. There was this one time the mean girls at our school literally threw pizza at her face to tell her that that's what her face looks like. And I would always try to help her with her confidence. But I noticed me being around her all the time, I started to get bullied. And people would always attack me about hanging out with her. But don't worry, I'd always handle myself. But it got to a point where it was just overly done. So one day, I just wanted to see a test of what would happen if I didn't talk to her for the day or hang out with her. And the next day, she disappeared. Come back for part two. Part two on how my best friend faked her death. So, like I said, I started to get bullied for hanging around her. So I wanted to try and see what would happen if I decided not to really hang out with her for a day. And the next day, she disappeared. So the day she wasn't at school, I went back home and called her. Her mom picked up and I asked her if she was there. Her mom said, no, I thought that she was with you. So that night, Amanda never came home. So the next day, her mom had told me that she was going to go to the police station and file a missing persons report. But she was told she couldn't really file one because the person had to be missing for at least 72 hours to be considered missing. And I felt so scared because she's never missing. She never ups and leaves. And I started to believe it was because the day I stopped talking to her. And I was blaming myself for her being gone. And I was hoping that she wasn't kidnapped. But come back for part three if you want to know what happened. Part three on how my best friend faked her own death. So Amanda was missing for a week. Her mom had came to the school to let them know that if they ever saw her come by to please let her know or to please call the police. And during this whole time, a lot of people were coming up to me asking me what happened to her. And of course, I had to tell them that I didn't know because I didn't. But all I could hope is that she was safe and alive. There was a few students that laughed about her being missing, but there was a few students that cared. So I was asking people to put up posters. Around this time, social media wasn't really out, so we couldn't necessarily post anything online. Everything went on polls. Amanda was also in the news. And every day I cried hoping that she would come back. After 2 weeks of her being gone, I get a letter from Amanda. And I'm so shocked because I'm like, oh my gosh, where is she? And it was a suicide letter. Come back. Part 4 on how my best friend faked her own death. So I got a letter in the mail and it was from Amanda. I was so shocked about the letter, I opened it up really quickly. When I read it, I found out that it was a suicide letter. And I just sat there and cried. I had went to her house and knocked on the door to let her mom know, but her mom also received the same letter. After a couple days, her mom did have the police do another search and no one could find her. I was hoping maybe she didn't commit suicide in a place that we could never find her. I don't know, but it just didn't feel right and how she just left off this way. Her mom just couldn't believe it. So a couple months I would stay inside her mom's house. I'd sleep inside of her room, just grieving her being lost. But I couldn't believe that she committed suicide. I didn't believe that she was dead, and neither did her mom. Deep down I knew that she was somewhere out there. Come back for part 5. Part 5 on how my best friend faked her death. So after 2 years of Amanda being missing, even though she wrote those letters to us, we both still didn't believe that she was gone. And I thought about her just about every day. During these years, her mom would constantly do searches. Maybe if she wasn't alive, then maybe they could find her body. Then she would find the truth. Her mom couldn't accept the fact that maybe she was dead. And every week on Sunday, she'd go out there even by herself. My mom and a few of her friends would always tell her she can't keep doing that. She'll even sometimes go out in the middle of the night, walk around calling for her. And her mom started to get really sick. After the 3rd year of her being gone, her dad finally came inside the picture. Amanda was never really close with her dad. He wasn't really a part of her life. He started to see how mentally ill her mother was becoming, so he decided to set up a funeral so this all could end. But her mom didn't want to attend. Come back for Part 6 on how my best friend faked her death. So her dad wanted to set up the funeral so they could finally end this grieving. Her mom didn't want to attend because she didn't believe that she was dead, and I still couldn't believe it either. Her dad read the note, and he wanted them both to stop all this pain. After a couple months battling out of doing a funeral, he finally did one. And I started thinking, maybe she is gone, because maybe then I could let go of this whole situation. So, of course, me and my family attended the funeral. Of course, they had no body to bury, but they did set up a grave. And they put her stone in the ground. So, after 11 years of that happening, I believe that she was dead. I had moved to Texas, met my husband, which I married, and I got pregnant. Maybe 4 months into my pregnancy, I wanted to take mommy classes. And when I got there, the instructor looked like Amanda's mom. Part 7 on how my best friend faked her death. I got pregnant and I wanted to start taking mommy classes. When I had got to the class, the instructor looked like Amanda's mom, but almost like a younger version. When I looked at her face even closer, she had the same mole that Amanda had down the bottom of her chin. And then I snapped, "That's Amanda." When I walked up to her and said, "Amanda," she looked at me and froze. After she stared at me for 5 seconds, a girl comes up to her and says, "Mom." I looked over and gasped. After she talked with her daughter, there was more and more women coming in for the class. And once I realized it was her, I ran back to my car. When I got to my car, I started to have a panic attack because that was her. And the daughter that called for her had to be maybe 12 or 13 years old. And I started to think, in order for Amanda to have a 12-year-old now, she would have to have gotten pregnant months before she went missing. Story time on how my parents forced me into acting. I'd play roles that were on TV networks like Disney Channel and Nickelodeon. And I also did PBS Kids and a few other networks. As a child actor, my parents expected a lot from me. The roles that I played would pay the bills at home. When I was younger and I was acting, I didn't know that money came with it. So whenever I did act, if anything that had to do with money, my parents would handle it. And still to this day, I haven't seen that money. But anyways, so during my time of acting, my parents put me in acting classes, singing, and dancing. They really wanted me to be that triple threat, but when it came to these shows that I played in, I would never get the main character. I'd always be casted like an extra that had a few lines. When I finally got my big break, I was casted in the Hannah Montana show. But you will not believe what my parents had to do for me to get that role. Part 2 on how my parents forced me into acting. So finally, I got a major role in a Hannah Montana show. For my role, I necessarily didn't audition. My parents built up a contract and forced my signature. In order for me to play the role, there were certain things that I had to do. When it came to getting clothes, I had to make sure I bought my clothes. With the money that I made at my previous acting jobs, I had to make sure my own makeup was done, had to make sure my own hair was done, and I also had to do janitor work, as in like sweep, mop the floors. Maybe a good 2 months before the show had started, I had to get the stage set up and the scene. 2 months of working and not really getting paid for it. The head of Disney had found out about the contract and forced to sue my parents if they had continued with it. After the whole situation, I never got the role, and I put all that work in for no compensation and no role. Story time on how I joined a cult that believed in preteen marriages. And I'm talking 10, 11, and 12 years old. Now, when I first joined, I didn't know it was a cult. I just thought it was a place where people just praised God. So coming into it, I recently had just lost my father, and my uncle suggested that I come to these circle meetings. And the meetings help with things like grief. When I joined, everything was fine, and I was getting the help. Instead of thinking deeply about my heart, they got me to think deeply about my brain and my mental health. And our teacher, he didn't like to be called pastor. He just talked about the ways of the world and God's plan. One thing I noticed that with his lessons, he would never use a Bible. I never questioned it because I believed it's because he knew a lot about it. But that was a red flag. I'll be back with a part 2. Part 2 on how I joined a cult. So our teacher, aka, was kind of like a preacher. One of the red flags were the fact that he never read from the Bible. And I always assumed because maybe he just knew a lot. So anyways, as I'm spending my time at this cult, they were telling me how I should be dressing, how I should speak to others, and always staying with the family. And anyone that didn't believe what we believed were looked at as devils. So after a couple months, I started back up with college, and I started hanging out with my friends again. So one day there was a block party going on, and of course I went with my friends. Then I saw this one guy from my church. I said, hey, gave him a hug, and he asked me about my friends. They turned around and said hey to him, and then he looked at him strangely, pulled me aside and said, you should not be hanging out with these girls. He was talking about how they were dressing and how they're basically Satan. It gets crazier. Come back for part 3 on how I joined a cult. So the guy from my church that I saw at the block party, he was talking about how my friends were dressing, how they talked and saying that they were Satan. He told me to stay away from them. And he was telling me that if I continued to be around them, that I will be cursed. He said that he was going to tell the group about my situation with me hanging out with them and that he prays that I stay away from them. But if I continue to be friends with them, that I will be part of this whole demon tribe. And it's crazy because I looked at that man as one of the father figures inside the group, but now I just felt like that was controlling. I told him that they were good people and that we've been friends for years and that I'm not going to go anywhere. Then he took some water from his pocket, which I believe was probably holy water. He splashed it on his hands and put it on my forehead and said, rebuke the devil. Literally in the middle of the block party, everybody was looking at us like we were crazy. I told him to get off of me and he would not let go. And he was squeezing my arm so tight to the point I was. Part 4 on how I joined a cult. So, in the middle of the block party, he literally puts holy water in his hand, slams it into my face, and says, rebuke the devil. And I'm telling him, please get off of me. And he squeezes my arm so hard to the point it's bleeding. The blood wasn't dripping from my arm or anything like that. It was almost like an Indian burn bleed. And my skin was torn, which is why I was bleeding. And anyway, these group of guys got him off of me. And the group of guys were telling him to leave and don't come back. And on his way out, he was speaking in tongues and throwing holy water at me and left. I was so scared, and my friends told me, do not go back to the group. So after the whole incident, I didn't go back for months. When I finally came back, it was around Christmas time. And I went back to the group because the date of my dad's death was coming up. When I came into the room of the group, everyone looked at me like I was crazy. Everyone screamed for me to get out and called me all types of Satan and devils. And I never went back.